Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. After discussing many of the crucial provisions in the head of income capital gains, let us continue with some more provisions in this topic in relation to certain special types of transactions once again, and computation of capital gains for shares related transactions has to be very well practiced also. We'll do some of those questions also in the today's session. But before that, in continuation of 45 section series, let us look at this particular aspect of capital gains in relation to a specified agreement which is mentioned in 45(5)(a). We have touched this earlier while understanding the cost of acquisition in case of an asset which was received in pursuance of a specified agreement, which can be called as development agreement related contract. But that comes at a later stage. Prior to that, if there is a specified agreement entered into between the SSE and some of the developers, then what happens at the time of entering into that agreement is what is told by this 45(5)(a) section. Of course, this section only is applicable to individuals and HUF. No other SSE will get attracted with this. In case the SSE, being an individual or HUF, enters into a specified agreement for the development of a project. Project means, let us say, building. Not necessarily only building. It could be development of a land and then building also constructed on that, whatever it may be. But in general, the most common way that a land owner enters into an agreement with the developer is the land owner gives up his land and developer agrees to develop that land and give back the owner either a piece of developed land or a piece of the buildings that was constructed by the developer. But the point here is the taxability of such agreement itself arises when that transfer takes place. So this is also a case where the transfer is entering into agreement itself. So if a landowner, Mr. X, enters into an agreement with the developer, Mr. Y, telling that Y will develop that land into some other building, and after the completion of development, X will get a portion of that building that Y has already constructed. That is the agreement. Prior to this introduction of 45(5)(a), which happened recently, but prior to that, these development agreements were a big matter of litigation. Why? Because taxability used to arise the moment the landowner enters into an agreement with the developer. Imagine landowner gave up his land and just signed a piece of paper. He did get nothing from the developer now. He might get something from the developer in future in the form of a developed land or building. But still, earlier, the landowner had to pay the capital gains tax. And mind you, the tax has always to be paid in money. The landowner cannot give a piece of land to the income tax department. He has to pay money. But where is money for him? Where did he receive money? He didn't receive any money. He only signed a piece of paper. Earlier, it was taxable in the hands of the landowners, when they entered into the development agreements, naturally most of the landowners could not pay that tax. That naturally became a big litigation point. Thousands of crores of cases were pending related to this litigation, which is even unfair litigation also, because if government is asking tax from the landowner from an income which he did not even receive yet, so that was completely unfair. So in order to rectify that, they have introduced 45(5)(a). Now at least the landowner is liable to pay tax, and the income that is arising or the capital gain that is arising from such a transfer. What is transfer here? Entering into specified agreement itself is a transfer, but such a transfer shall be chargeable to income tax in the previous year in which the certificate of completion for the whole or part of the project is issued by the competent authority. Actually, still this is unfair, but what can we do? Something is better than nothing types. At least half blind is better than full blind. One eye is better than completely being blind. Like that, we have to be understanding this. Irrespective of our interpretation and comment and whatever opinion on this, the provision is that. Now what is the provision? Earlier what happened and all, we don't need to know that. Now what is the provision is, when a landowner, an individual or HUF enters into a development agreement, then that is a transfer. The year of transfer is the year in which the agreement has been entered into. But it is not taxable in the year of transfer. It is taxable in the year in which the certificate of completion for, that is where the problem is, whole or part of the project is issued by competent authority. Even if part of the project is said to be complete by the competent authority, then that landowner who has given up his land is supposed to pay tax in that year, though he might not have received anything which is completed. So that is one unfair thing. Can't help it, that is a provision. Not only that, even if you observe here, even after the project is completed, let us say fully completed only, partly completed is one thing which is unfair anyway. Let us take even fully completed. Even then, what the landowner, the individual or HUF, the SSC, the transferor, what he has received, he only received a building or land. He did not receive cash, but still he has to pay tax in cash. Only betterment is, earlier he had to pay tax in the year in which he has entered into the agreement itself. Now he has to pay tax in the year in which the certificate of completion for the whole or part of the project is issued by competent authority. That is the point here to be noted. But once again, when we look at the transferor, the landowner, what he received is not again cash completely. If that is completely cash, it is not called a development agreement, that becomes a sale of land. That's over. That is one shot. So definitely he will receive maybe some part cash, but certain portion definitely he will receive land or building or both, in lieu of whatever the land he has given up for development. That is also not cash, another asset only, but still the stamp duty value of such land or building, whatever he has received as his share, shall be taken as full value of consideration, and that becomes taxable in the year in which the certificate of completion is issued by competent authority, whether it is for whole of the project or part of the project. But stamp duty valuation has to be taken on which date? On the date when the certificate of completion has been issued by the competent authority. Of course, as increased by any consideration received in cash also, if any. If any cash is there, that need not be valued, it is value by itself. So what is full value of consideration in this case for the landowner, our individual or HUF who is our SSE, is stamp duty value of land or building or both that he has received as his share on the date of issuing the certificate of completion plus any cash that is received shall be taken as full value of consideration for the landowner. That will be taxable in the year in which the certificate of completion has been received. But once again, calculations will have to happen as far as the indexation is concerned. Year of transfer is what? Year of transfer is the year in which the agreement has been entered into. But year of taxability is that year in which the certificate of completion has been received by the developer or for the project issued by a competent authority. So when it comes to the calculation here, full value of consideration will be what? Stamp duty value of the land or building or both that the SSA has received. On which date? On the date of issue of completion certificate plus any cash that he has received, that is full value of consideration. Then what is his cost of acquisition? The cost of acquisition is the cost of acquisition what he had for his land which he has given up. That is asset going out. Cost of acquisition of that asset will be taken. But indexation has to be done for the year of transfer, which is the year in which the agreement has been entered into. So this can also be the another case in continuation of what we discussed yesterday, which are all exceptions to the general rule that year of transfer and year of taxability generally will be same. But in all these cases, insurance claims, compulsory acquisition, enhanced compensation on compulsory acquisition, or conversion of capital asset into stock in trade, all of these are exceptions. This is one more type, where year of transfer is the year in which the agreement is entered into, and year of taxability is the year in which the certificate of completion has been obtained. That is the provision related to 45(5)(a). Next level is what we already discussed. Imagine this land or building what he has got as his share already, which was taxed, is sold. Next level. Then whatever is already taken as full value of consideration under section 45(5)(a), that becomes the cost of acquisition of that asset, because to that extent it has already been taxed. So next layer of transaction, when the land or building are both so received by the SSE is sold later, then sold means you know so much is the consideration. Their consideration will not be a problem. Cost of acquisition will be a problem, because he did not purchase them, he got them as his share. But since it was already taxed to the extent of his stamp duty value of that land or building, to the extent what was already taxed, to the extent which was already considered to be his income under 45(5)(a), that becomes the cost of acquisition of those land or building or both, if they are sold later. This is what the next point we discussed earlier. Now we little came backwards of the similar transaction. That's it. That is the point related to 45(5)(a) section. However, these beneficial provisions would not apply where the SSE transfers his share in the project on or before the date of issue of said completion certificate. If at all, even before receiving this completion certificate, if the SSE has sold his share of land or building before the completion itself, quite possible. Apartments and all need not be sold after completion. Lot of times, lot of buildings under construction can be sold also. If the SSE has sold them, then normal provisions will only apply. These beneficial provisions will not apply, as if these are beneficial. Okay, let us consider them as beneficial. To whatever extent they are beneficial, whether they are beneficial or not, keeping that apart, this provision itself will not apply if the asset is really sold before even completion happened. Then sold means already he received the money. Whatever the money he received, that will be the full value of consideration. Whatever the cost of acquisition of the land that he has given up, that will be the cost of acquisition. Natural normal calculation of capital gains will happen. Then this completion certificate and all these things will not apply in such particular case. That is 45(5)(a) development agreement, we can say. Then 46 is also a very, very important provision. Special questions were asked earlier also on this. That is related to distribution of assets by the companies in liquidation. One of these points we already discussed, 46(1), that we already discussed. What is that? if the company distributes the assets to its shareholders upon liquidation, that is not regarded as transfer in the hands of the company. Thus, it is not taxable for the company. From the company point of view, as part of discussion about transactions not regarded as transfer, though it is not section 47, because it is the same topic we included there and we discussed it, which was related to 46.1. If a company distributes assets to its shareholders upon its liquidation, that is not a transfer for the company. For the company, it's gone. It is not at all taxable since it is not even a transfer. But what about the shareholder? Asset received by the shareholder, definitely it is taxable in the hands of shareholder. But taxable how? Problem, because he did not receive cash, maybe he received assets. How to take full value of consideration? Full value of consideration for this purpose will be the fair market value of the assets received as reduced by deemed dividend under section 222C. That is why this becomes another important point. Why? Because this concept of deemed dividend under section 222 is in income from other sources, particularly in that one of them is this, that is 222C. There are 5 things, 222A, B, C, D, E. Here we are only looking at 222C, that is called deemed dividend. Dividend, we know, when the company earns profits, it distributes its profits to the shareholders, that is dividend. Then deemed dividend means what? It is not naturally dividend, but it is deemed to be dividend. What is that? There are other cases, we will come to them in the chapter of income from other sources. If we look at only 222C, what is deemed dividend is nothing but the distribution of assets by a company at the time of liquidation to the extent of accumulated profits is treated as a deemed dividend. Because the accumulated profits are reserves which are there in the balance sheet. They have been accumulated by not distributing dividend all these years. So if dividend was already distributed from them, those reserves themselves would not have existed. So those reserves are there. Now they are being given at the time of the liquidation means what? What are they representing? Are they not as good as dividend? Yes. That is why 222C says they are deemed to be dividend. To the extent of accumulated profits, it is deemed dividend. So that deemed dividend first we have to find out. Then that has to be reduced from fair market value of the assets which are received by the SEC. Then what is the resultant is called as full value of consideration at the time of liquidation of the company when the assets are received by the SEC, the shareholder we are saying about. Then what is his cost of acquisition? What he purchased originally? He purchased the shares of that company which is under liquidation. Whatever the cost of acquisition of those shares is, that will be anyway deducted as normal cost of acquisition or indexed cost of acquisition as the case may be. So that is the transaction upon liquidation of the company. For company, it is not a transfer. For shareholder, it is taxable. How much amount is taxable? Fair market value of the assets received minus deemed dividend. What is deemed dividend is nothing but the distribution at the time of liquidation by the company to the shareholders to the extent of the accumulated profits already there in the balance sheet can be deemed to be dividend. So that is reduced from fair market value of assets received by the SEC. Remaining is considered as full value of consideration. So what happens to deemed dividend which is reduced here? What happens is a different story. Of course, up to 10 lakhs rupees it is exempt, and beyond that it will be taxable, but that will be taxable not here, no, that will be taxable in income from other sources. That is why we are reducing it. Actually, the full value of consideration should be the fair market value of the assets which are received by the SEC. But that is not completely capital gain. That is why we are reducing it by deemed dividend, which would be taxable separately. How it will be taxable, what happens to that, those things we can discuss under income from other sources. But definitely that is not taxable under capital gain. That is why we are reducing it from the fair market value of the assets received by the shareholder from the company upon liquidation. That is the point here for shareholders' taxability. But this may continue the story. What if the assets so received upon liquidation are subsequently sold by the shareholders? Then, sold means then full value of consideration is not a problem. Cost of acquisition. is a problem because they did not buy that, they got it upon liquidation. What should be that? Naturally, whatever the fair market value of the assets on the date of distribution was there, that itself becomes the cost of acquisition without deducting deemed dividend. Here we should not deduct deemed dividend to find out cost of acquisition. Simply the fair market value of the assets which were received on the date of distribution will be taken as cost of acquisition of those assets when those assets are sold in future. That is the next level of transaction. So many things happens here. So you have to understand once again the entire transaction. First, the SSE or shareholder would have purchased the shares long back. Okay, he purchased the shares. Then the company ran for some years. Then something went wrong, company went on to liquidation. Then the company distributed some assets upon liquidation to this shareholder. For a company, it was not at all taxable, but the shareholder received some assets. Fair market value of those assets minus deemed dividend is considered to be the full value of consideration minus whatever the original cost of acquisition of those shares will be taxable in the hands of the shareholder upon receipt of these assets itself. Whether he received cash or not doesn't matter. Once again, it is taxable whenever he receives these assets. Fair market value of those assets is simply taxable. Unfair once again, but still we can't help it. It is taxable means taxable in the year only when it is received by the SSE. However, those assets next level, when they are sold by the SSE, then the same fair market value which was earlier taxed now becomes cost of acquisition of those assets, which will be reduced from the real full value of consideration received by the SSE upon selling those assets subsequently. That's it. That is section 46, distribution of assets by the companies in liquidation. Very, very important provision. Problems can be very well expected from this special topic. This slump sale, distribution of assets upon liquidation, these are all special problems which can be very much expected even for 4 to 5 marks. Earlier some exams they were given for 6 to 8 marks also, depending upon size of the question. So very important provision and model of problems we can say from this chapter. Other than the regular questions anyway, bought the property, sold the property, got the property by gift or will or something, then sold. Those buying and selling, acquiring and transferring, those are normal transactions anyway, those will be there. There also real estate properties could be there, even shares could be there. So those problems are anyway quite normal, typical questions. But suddenly a question from slump sale looks little different because it is an exclusive type of question which has nothing to do with many other provisions. Exclusively that provision only has to be applied. Section 50B only has to be applied. Same way here, section 46 only has to be applied. So these are the special transactions, we have to apply them. Same with the conversion of capital asset into stock in trade also is another type of special transaction. All these things can be asked as questions exclusively. Let us look at how to solve the questions related to section 46. Exercise number 24. Ram had purchased 5,000 equity shares in June 1994 of Messrs. Kamath and Company Limited at the rate of 2 rupees per share. That means cost of acquisition was 10,000 rupees. Messrs. Kamath and Company Limited goes into liquidation on June 30th, 2019, naturally during our previous year. Balance sheet of the company on the date of liquidation stood as under. Asset side of the balance sheet. This balance sheet is of the company. You have to read everything and keep it in mind carefully. Company balance sheet this is. Asset side, this company has one asset, that is debentures in some other company. That is Patel and Company, whoever it is. This 30 lakhs rupees is the asset that this Kamath and Company Limited already has on its balance sheet asset side. Cash in hand is there 10 lakhs 9,850. Liability side 50,000 equity shares of 10 rupees each are there, 5 lakhs rupees. Accumulated profits are there 30 lakhs. Provision for dividend tax is there 5 lakhs 9,850 on the liability side. This is the balance sheet of the company on the date of liquidation. Now, after retaining 5 lakhs 9,850 for paying dividend tax, naturally that has to be paid by the company. That means cash balance will be how much? After retaining 5 lakhs 9,850, remaining 5 lakhs cash is there. 5 lakh 9,850 has to be paid. Imagine it is paid. So imagine there is entry that is passed, dividend tax account to cash account. 5 lakhs 9,850 gone. Both of them from asset side, liability side gone. Remaining asset side is what? Cash in hand 5 lakhs. Debentures 30 lakhs. Then the remaining assets are distributed to the shareholders. In the process, on 30th June 2019, Ram gets 1000 debentures with a fair market value of 3 lakhs and 50,000 in cash. That's what he received upon liquidation. That is one transaction. After that, he transferred the entire debentures on 10th March 2020 for 3 lakhs 80,000. So, here, that is the next level transaction. Indicate the tax consequences of these transactions. We'll come to the sale of debentures later. But prior to that, liquidation itself happened. What is the taxability in the hands of Mr. Ram upon the liquidation of the company? That we have to write. When the question says tax consequences, clearly you have to write about company also, not only about Mr. Ram. So first and foremost point, before going to any calculations, you should write, according to 46(1), a company, if it distributes assets upon its liquidation, that is not a transfer in the hands of the company. So, as far as Kamath Company Limited is concerned, there is no taxability at all in this liquidation, first point. Then we look at what about the story of Mr. Ram. For that purpose, we need naturally the full value of consideration first, and then we have to deduct indexed cost of acquisition, then only we will get capital gains. But what is full value of consideration in case of liquidation? That has to be done in working note separately. What is full value of consideration according to the provision of section 46? Whatever the fair market value of the assets received minus deemed dividend, that is full value of consideration. So fair market value of the assets which are received, what are those? First thing first, 1000 debentures he got, and fair market value is 3 lakhs. Okay, already given 3 lakhs. And he also received cash 50,000. Okay, cash does not need any market value, that itself is its fair market value. So 3,50,000 is the total value of the assets that are received by Mr. Ram. Now from this we have to deduct deemed dividend under section 222C. How much is that? To the extent of accumulated profits of the company, it is deemed to be dividend. So what people will do? 30 lakhs something they will look at accumulated profits. That is wrong. Because Ram is not the only shareholder in this company. 30 lakhs is the accumulated profits of the company as a whole. You cannot say 30 lakhs is accumulated profits. That is wrong. Why? Because in that, Ram's share is only 10%. How do we know that? Because he has 5,000 equity shares and company had total of 50,000 equity shares. Only 10% of accumulated profits are related to him. That means deemed dividend is how much in this? 3 lakhs. Which means 50,000 is what is full value of consideration. That's it. That is full value of consideration, which is fair market value of the assets received minus deemed dividend. Then indexed cost of acquisition. Definitely it is a very long term asset because he purchased it somewhere in 94 itself. Ideally fair market value on 1/4/2001 was given, we should take that. Since it is not there, we cannot say I don't know. We have to use whatever the information is available. Original cost only will be taken. If fair market value on 1/4/2001 is not there, we don't have any option. 5,000 shares he purchased at 2 rupees per share. 10,000 is the original value or cost of acquisition into 289 divided by 100 naturally, because these assets were acquired prior to 2001 or 1/4/2001. That means 28,900 will be the indexed cost of acquisition naturally. So 21,100 will be the long-term capital gain that will be chargeable in the hands of Mr. Ram. 21,100. That's it. That is the answer for first part of the question, which is taxable in the hands of Ram under section 46. Now the next level. Okay, he received the debentures. Fine. Then he sold them on 10th March 2020 for 3,80,000. So full value of consideration for those debentures is 3,80,000. What is the cost of acquisition? We have to take fair market value without deducting deemed dividend. What was the fair market value of debentures? Only debentures were transferred. Only for debentures we have to take fair market value. That is 3 lakhs. So resultant is naturally 80,000. No indexation for debentures. But still, when was this purchased and sold or acquired and sold? These debentures were acquired on 30th June, then sold on 10th March 2020. That means it is a short term capital gain because they are held for less than 12 months. So that is a short term capital gain. We don't know whether it is listed and all those things. Whatever the case may be, even the least possible period of holding also is 12 months, and this happened to be less than 12 months. So definitely it is a short term capital gain for sure. That is how much? 80,000 rupees is the short term capital gain. Long term capital gain is 21,100. That is the answer for question number 24. Then let us move on to question number 25. This was a past examination question. Mrs. or Miss Vasumati purchased 10,000 equity shares of Rajesh Company Private Limited on 28th February 2009. That means in the year 2008-9 for 1,20,000 rupees. That was the cost of acquisition. The company was wound upon 31st July 2019, which is naturally in our previous year. Following is the summarized financial position of the company on that date. Look at the asset side here. Earlier those were debentures, now there are agricultural lands and there is cash at bank also. So these are the assets of the company. Liability side, equity shares, general reserve is there and provision for taxation is also there. But look at the holding of Ms. Vasumati. Automatically out of 60,000 shares, if she holds 10,000 equity shares, that means what is her share? First of all, 1/6 is her share. That has to be first identified. Then remaining things we have to understand how they are actually distributed upon liquidation. Now look at this. The tax liability was ascertained at 3 lakhs rupees. The provision given for taxation in the balance sheet is only 2,50,000. But tax liability really ascertained to be 3 lakhs rupees. So we have to pay 3 lakhs, no option. But where from the other provision will come? Naturally, that has to be reduced from general reserve. So after this provision, general reserve would become naturally 39 lakhs 50,000 only, because that 50,000 has to be transferred to provision. Let us say for understanding purposes, we need to create a provision. General reserve account at R2, provision for taxation another 50,000. Then you can even imagine provision for taxation account at R2, bank account 3 lakhs rupees. That means after that, how much is the cash that is remaining? All these things we have to identify. Cash that is remaining will be how much? 3,50,000. Out of 650, 3 lakhs is paid, means 3,50,000 is remaining. So there is a change from the balance sheet. Cash is only 3,50,000 remaining. Provision for taxation is gone. General reserve becomes 39,50,000 only. That is what we have to identify from this point. The remaining assets were distributed to the shareholders in the proportion of their shareholding. That means how much? She would have got 1/6 naturally. The market value of the 6 acres of agricultural land in urban area, that is, as on 31st July 2019 is 10 lakhs rupees per acre. So the market value of the lands is 6 acres. Per acre 10 lakhs is saying. So when the 6 acres are there in the balance sheet with a book value of 42 lakhs, out of them how many acres she will receive? Vasumati will receive 1/6 means 1 acre only she will receive. That means what is going to be the fair market value of the assets that she receives? One is urban agricultural land, 10 lakhs, because she will receive 1 acre. Out of 6 acres, she will receive 1 acre since her share is 1/6. Right? So 1 acre means 10 lakhs rupees per acre is the value. Fair market value has to be taken as if it is the full value of consideration. Of course, after reduced by the deemed dividend. Then agricultural land sold, will come to that sale part later. But only this land she will receive or what? No, she will receive cash also. Her share of cash also she will receive. 3,50,000 divided by 6. That means 58,333 cash also she will receive. So total assets that she will receive will be 10,58,333. From that, we have to reduce deemed dividend. What is deemed dividend? to the extent of accumulated profits in the balance sheet. Earlier they were 40 lakhs, now they became 39 lakh 50,000 only, divided by 6, her share, that is 6 lakhs 58,333. Deemed dividend if you reduce under 222C, then remaining will be naturally 4 lakhs is the full value of consideration upon liquidation. So these are the calculations that we should do before we start for actual computation of capital gains, or you can show them in the working notes afterwards also. So what is full value of consideration now? 4 lakhs as already calculated, which is nothing but fair market value of the assets received minus deemed dividend. That is full value of consideration received by Vasumati. Deduct indexed cost of acquisition. Indexed cost of acquisition will be how much? 1,20,000 she has purchased these shares for, into 289 naturally, divided by which year she has purchased? 2008-9. So you have to look at the index number for that year, 137. So 1,20,000 into 289 divided by 137 means how much? 2,53,139. That means there is a long-term capital gain of 1,46,861. That's it. That is a long-term capital gain that she has received by receiving the assets upon liquidation of the company. The assets themselves are taxable, whether she sells those agricultural lands or not. Just because she has received, they become taxable. Fair market value of them will become taxable. Of course, after adding the cash also and also deducting the deemed dividend, we get full value of consideration. From that indexed cost of acquisition, if you deduct, we get long-term capital gain. That is the answer for first phase of the question. But the story is not over. The agricultural lands received above were sold by Vasumati on 28th February 2020 for 15 lakhs rupees. So, what is the tax consequences in the hands of the company and Miss Vasumati? Company, we know nothing is there because according to 46(1), distribution of assets by the company upon liquidation is not a transfer. Hence, it is not at all taxable. For company, there is nothing. For Vasumati, there is a long-term capital gain of 146,861. Also, let us look at other next level transaction. 15 lakhs rupees is the full value of consideration for those debentures. But what was, not debentures, what is this? Agricultural land. 15 lakhs it was sold for. But what was the fair market value taken upon the date of liquidation? That is 10 lakhs. Which means 5 lakhs rupees will be what? Short-term capital gain. Why short-term? Because these are held for less than 24 months. And not only that, it is a urban agricultural land, you have to remember that. Rural agricultural land, if she received, even if she sold it also, it would not have mattered and nothing would have been taxable. But if it is urban agricultural land that is sold, definitely it is a capital asset, hence selling of that will become taxable. Urban agricultural land will not also be taxable if it was compulsorily acquired by the government under section 1037. That is different. But that is not the case here. It is sold, not compulsorily acquired. Hence, 5 lakhs rupees becomes taxable as a short-term capital gain in the hands of Vasumati. That's it. That is question number 25. Examination question, perfectly possible to be asked. Need to show the workings and relevant provisions have to be written very carefully in the exam so that we can obtain full marks for such kind of questions. That was question number 25. And very important provision of section 46. So 45(5)(a) development agreement, 46 liquidation of company. 45(5)(a) also questions can be framed. Once you know the provision, we can apply that provision clearly. What will be the full value of consideration when the agreement is entered into? That will be stamp duty value of the land or building receivable or received by the SSC on the date of completion certificate being issued. Calculation should happen on the date of agreement whereas taxability will happen in the year in which completion certificate is actually received, whether wholly or partly. Plus any cash also will be added to the full value of consideration. So, provisions, once we are clear, any type of question that comes from them, we should be able to apply. So, any type of application can be asked in any of the points that are there in the capital gains, not only capital gains, for that matter, any chapter also. That is the reason taxation is all about provisions. Provisions have to be thoroughly remembered, thoroughly understood. The entire transaction has to be understood in its completeness, not just piecemeal. So that is the important aspect of getting hold on this chapter, that is capital gains. Now there is one special point which is related to buyback of shares. Once again, normally not that important, but still, since MCQs are there, we cannot leave them. It becomes important, everything becomes important. So what is the capital gain on the buyback of shares? Normally there should not be any special point here, but Income Tax Act has naturally a little bit complicated it unnecessarily, whether we like it or not. Normally what is the buyback of shares means? Company bought back the shares. SSC has sold the shares to the company. How should any difference be made when the share is sold to some other person or to the company? SC is a shareholder who sold the shares to the company itself, and he got some money. That should become taxable. That should not be a big deal. Normally, yes. So when a listed company buys back its own shares, then the consideration received by the shareholder is considered the full value of consideration, and capital gains is computed accordingly in the hands of shareholder. When it is a listed company, if it is a listed company, normal provisions will only apply, in the sense, whenever the company buys back those shares, whatever the buyback price which the shareholder receives from the company will be full value of consideration. However, in case of buyback of shares by unlisted companies have a speciality. Who is buying the shares back? Company. Who is selling? The shareholder, literally speaking. So who should be the one who should be taxable? Shareholder. But for unlisted companies, what the act says, company will become leviable, company will have to pay tax. There is additional income tax leviable in the hands of company. That is the reason same thing cannot be taxed in two cases. Both in company also, both in shareholders' hands also, same income cannot be taxed. Consequently, the income arising to the shareholders in respect of such buyback of shares would be exempt under section 1034A for unlisted companies. However, this provision is applicable till 4th July 2019 only. This is one more new phenomena, one way we can say. In the middle of the year, certain changes are happening, we can't help it. In the middle of the year. Earlier, any changes happen, they used to happen in the Annual Finance Act. Okay, Baba, this assessment year, this amendment is applicable, another assessment year, another amendment is applicable, we used to say. But recently, the changes and amendments and whatever the things, whatever they want to do, they are doing somewhere, whenever they want to do. Like for example, if you observe this depreciation rates for vehicles and all, newly purchased automobiles, whether it is a car or if it is a truck, etc., very big higher amounts of rates of depreciations were given. But for that, applicability will not start from the year beginning. That will start from somewhere in the middle of the year. We have to remember those dates, can't help it. That is how it is. Law is there like that, we have to remember that. Same way here also, the change happened, and our application of this following provisions will apply only from when the buyback affected on or after 5/7/2019. Till then, the old provisions will apply. That means for listed company, it's a normal transaction, just like any sale for the shareholder selling to some third party, shareholder selling to company itself, doesn't make any difference. That was 46A. However, for unlisted companies, taxability was there for the company, not for shareholder. Since taxability is there for the company, that is why shareholder is exempt from tax under section 1034A. This was the case till 4th July 2019. But from 5th July 2019 onwards, they have made it to a different level. Not listed, unlisted. They have changed it to domestic and other than domestic company. So, taxability arises in the buyback of shares by domestic companies. So listed also, unlisted also. If domestic companies do the buyback of shares, who is doing it? Company, naturally. Then who is liable to pay tax? Company is subject to tax. Company is subject to tax on the amounts that were bought back at the rate of 23.296%, which is nothing but 20% plus 12% surcharge plus 4% cess, 23.296%. So that can be just understood and remembered like this: plus 12% surcharge on that plus 4% cess. So if you remember that, you don't need to remember this number. That is why. That is the reason. Otherwise, you remember the number 23.296%. Who has to pay? Company has to pay. So that is a provision from 5/7/2019 onwards. If it is a domestic company, then if buyback of shares happens by a company other than a domestic company, then company is not subject to tax. So naturally, who will be subjected to paying the capital gains tax under section 46A? Shareholder will pay the tax. Of course, in the first case, domestic companies, because company is paying the tax, shareholder does not have to pay any tax because his income is exempt under section 1034A. The first point of this earlier also was the same, but that was only earlier applicable to unlisted companies. Now this has been extended to the listed companies also. So the classification is now not listed, unlisted. It is domestic and non-domestic. Domestic companies, company has to pay tax on its buyback of shares, not the shareholders. For shareholders, it is exempt. And for non-domestic companies, shareholder has to pay according to normal calculation. How much ever money he receives upon buyback minus his original cost of acquisition. Shareholder is subjected to tax, but company is not subjected to tax. What about other things like buyback of specified securities by any company? Specified securities are different. We are talking about shares here normally. Any other securities, specified securities, then also company is not subjected to pay tax. Shareholder is subjected to tax under 46A normal point of view. So when it comes to shares, which normally happens, specified securities can be considered as other than shares. So when it comes to shares bought back by a domestic company, only variety point is company has to pay tax at the rate of 23.296%, not the shareholder. Whereas if the shares are bought back by a non-domestic company, then shareholder has to pay tax. If the other securities are bought back by any company, whether domestic or not domestic, then also shareholder has to pay tax. See, normally, logically, anytime shareholder has to pay tax. Why? Because he is the guy who is transferring the securities and he is the one who is receiving the money actually. Who is receiving money when the company is buying back? Shareholder is receiving the money because shareholder is selling the shares to the company. So normally shareholder only should be liable to tax. So that is there. We don't need to specially remember these 2 points. That is quite commonsensical points. These two are common. Company has no tax liability. Shareholder will have to pay according to normal calculations. Nothing special there. Only speciality is what? When shares are bought back by a domestic company, then company is subjected to pay tax, not the shareholder. Why and all we cannot ask. Yes, ultimate objective is discouraging buyback of shares. As simple as that. What happens is normally tax policies are used not only just for increasing the revenue. Increasing revenue of the government is only one of the objectives of taxation. As a fiscal policy, taxation also plays a crucial role in the development of an economy. So at a macroeconomic level, a lot of tax changes and tax law changes will be aimed at economic level influences. So this is also similar to that. Why is that? If at all companies have too much of cash with them, then only they will go for buyback. For example, couple of years back, Infosys did a huge buyback. Recently, last year or before that, HCL also did a huge buyback. So a lot of these software companies have so much cash on their balance sheets, they don't actually what to do with that. So what they are doing, they are buying back the shares, thereby reducing the number of outstanding shares, and of course thereby reducing their EPS as well. I mean increasing the EPS as well. Whatever the purpose may be, when the companies are having too much of cash, they go for buyback. And what happens with that money? Shareholders will receive that money. Shareholders might pay some tax, fine, but end of the day, money if it is with the individuals, then that might not be spent for investment purposes properly. So, in a general sense, if we have to look at, in a general sense, not that every policy will have the same kind of thought, each policy will have its own thought, but in a general sense, the Income Tax Act in the recent past, particularly in the past 4 or 5 years, we can say, has been amended in such a way that money is not abundantly with the public, it is more with the companies, or you want to call them corporates. When the money is with the corporates, cash is with the corporates, they will invest. Is the idea. Whether they invest or not is a different story. The economic level thought process will be like this. When the money is with individuals, we know what we do in India. Our people will buy gold, land, and keep them idle. All the money which is actually very active, the moment it comes to individuals, most of the cases in India, it is a historically proven fact that it becomes idle. The money which is so active so far, as long as it was with the company, that was invested, it was paid to somebody, some activity happened. In simple words, you can call economic activity. When the money is with the corporates or the organizations or businesses, that will be circulating, that will be active money. But the money, once it comes to individuals, generally who are the shareholders, whoever they may be, small or big, whoever they may be, what they will do? The dividend, that and crores of rupees he will receive every year in the form of dividend only from his own means being a major shareholder, he receives very big amount of dividend from Reliance Industries, let us say. He does. There is no surprise or secret in that. What should he do with that money? Can he eat that? Can he make gold biscuits and eat them? What he can do with that money? It's all legal money. We're not talking black money and all. It's a completely taxed money. So, the idea of the government is these people, whoever they may be, topmost possible person like a Mukesh Ambani, till a small investor who has few shares, who receives, let us say, some 1 lakh rupees as dividend, or company has bought back the shares at a good price and he sold them and he suddenly received 5 lakhs rupees. Just imagine a middle class family suddenly receives a 5 lakhs rupees money. What they will do? Don't we know that? They will either buy some gold, or they will put it in some fixed deposit or something else. Very, very rarely that will be once again brought back into the financial system. Of course, some of the people might put it in mutual funds, other things. That is okay. To some extent, it comes back into the financial system. But most of the cases, it so happens that it will be invested in idle assets like real estate. That is one of the most favorite investments in India. And even more than real estate, gold is the biggest favorite asset in India. So, many people, when they receive money, they will first buy gold. Some jewelry, something, they will buy. Just like that. What happened? So, this has been happening. With that, our gold reserves have piled up like anything. Gold reserves in the sense not with the government, with people only. But they are all lying idle now. They are all sitting in the safes and bank lockers. What is the use of that for the economy? Government tried to do gold monetization somewhere in 2015, but that was flopped because we didn't want our gold to be disclosed to the government. So, lot of efforts have happened somehow to bring more and more money into the circulation. Lot of efforts, this, that, gold monetization, even some other efforts have been done, including black money disclosure schemes and all that. but none of them have actually helped. So, yeah, for some other reasons, though it is not perfectly the only reason, demonetization they had to do. And of course, whatever they thought did not happen. But still, idea was that ki money which is idle, either in the form of black money or in the form of gold or other things which are like gray area transactions, that should become transparent first, that should be accounted for first, and that should be uh, actually becoming a white transaction going forward. So that should be active first of all. White, black, keep it apart. Ultimately, demonetization proved that there is no black money in India because almost 99% of the cash came back to the bank accounts. That is all white now. How can we say it is black money? So, because we don't know it before it, now we can come to know, okay, Baba, there is no black money in India. We are all very clear. Nobody is having any black money. All is clean and fantastic. But still, is it only in the form of cash? That is a mistake. It will not be in the form of cash. It will be in many, many forms. Mostly it will be in the form of shares, investments, bonds, debentures, international financial instruments, real estate, gold, whatnot. So many possibilities are there in which all this money can go around. So this is all another side of the story. But what is the problem with this is, if it is there, at least in the form of some active form, black or white, keep it apart. Even black money, active black money is also not that bad. At least it is doing some economic activity. So, economists may not say that it is bad. Tax point of view, it may be bad. But from economy point of view, if there is black money, white money, who cares? End of the day, is it in circulation or not? Is it actually active or not? Or is it dormant? That is a problem. What happens is, most of the cases in India, the money is invested and it has become dormant. Rather than becoming active and making more and more better future returns, we tend to invest in idle assets like jewelry, like real estate, and jewelry in the sense gold, because we want that price of gold to appreciate. That's enough. We don't want to do any work for earning more money. If I have 1 lakh rupees, I don't start a business to earn money from that 1 lakh rupees. Too much of effort. Why should I do? Rather, I will buy some shares or I will buy gold, wait for the market. Okay, what happens to gold? Daily I will look at it. 1 lakh became 1,50,000, I am happy because my investment has increased. But is it an active investment? Is it really adding to the economic activity? No. So at an economic level, macro level, these type of tendencies are very dangerous. Mostly those are very much prevalent in India and in general other Asian countries, wherein the money in circulation will be lesser, money which is idle will be more, because we are saving mentality people. So money should not be with public. That is the idea. That is the idea. Probably. I also don't know. From economy point of view, I can just imagine why such decisions could have been taken. Why dividend tax has to be there in the hands of shareholder, more than 10 lakhs rupees, why it should be taxed? So ridiculous. Because company already paid tax on the profits that it has earned. At the time of distribution of dividend, already it has paid tax, that is called dividend distribution tax. Of course, that second nonsense is abolished recently. That will be applicable for next assessment year onwards. Then dividend received by shareholder also has to be taxed if it is more than 10 lakhs. What is that? I mean, logically, where is the sense in that? But still it was like that. Idea is what? That's the point. Idea is more money or cash with the people will be, most of the cases, not be productive or not add much of value to the economic activity of the country. So if it is with the company, ideally, again, none of these things we are talking about have happened. Ideally, demonetization was supposed to remove all the black money, remove corruption and all. Has it happened is a different story. Some of that would have happened, some of that might not have happened. But ideally, the objective is what we are looking at. Objective, the original target was good. Same way, here also, a lot of these provisions have a good intention. Application finally, whether it backfires, that Nobody knows. If the government already knows it backfires, why would it do? They start with a good intention. They think that money with corporates means they will invest somewhere. If Infosys has, say, 40,000 crores of rupees cash and bank balances, what it will do with that? Just like that, suddenly they may think that, okay, let us buy back shares. What is the use of that? Money just goes into the public's hands and public will again buy gold and people like Ambani will construct another tall building. What is the use? That's only little bit of economic activity. But if the same 30-40,000 crores, let us say, Infosys uses for expanding its business, entering into a new sector, diversification, or when a new big facility building opened and offering employment for another 10,000 people in one of the backward areas. Imagine, these are all imaginations. Then that is good for the economy. That creates employment. So the idea is money should not be with the people, it should be ideally with the corporates, is the crux of the thought process with which many provisions have been made in the recent past. That is the reason a lot of times these provisions will tell us not actually taxing the companies, it is discouraging the companies to buy back. That is the point here. It is the discouraging. 23.296% tax company has to pay at the time of buying back its own shares. If anybody asks why sir, किस खुशी में pay करना है, there is no answer. Companies policy are even allowed by the Companies Act, it is buying back its own shares from its own shareholders, then they have to pay tax. On what? On why? There is no answer for it. So that is why when there is no answer for it, no logic for it, at least we have to think about maybe there is a noble intention behind it, otherwise why would they do it? Maybe there is an intention or intent of the statute could be like this, to discourage, that is clear. It is not to earn revenue. The government doesn't want companies to buy back shares and pay tax. That is not the idea. They want to discourage the buyback itself. On the other side, if you look at it, let us say the company has not paid earlier, shareholder has paid, let us say, and the same money at the level of company, it is a lump sum money. Let us say a company has bought back shares worth for 10,000 crores. Imagine 10,000 crores worth of shares it has bought back means it has to pay almost 2,300 crores of tax. That much tax the company has to pay. If imagine the same 10,000 crores of money goes into shareholders' hands, how many shareholders will be there? Hundreds of them will be there. For each of the shareholder, that comes to few lakhs of rupees. Somebody maybe few thousands of rupees only. Because this entire income is spread into multiple persons. And each person will have his own exemptions, etc., etc. Finally, will not pay any tax. So, actual revenue that government may get finally might be in peanuts. It may not be a huge amount. But now, by taxing it at the company level, it can get higher revenue also. That is one aspect of it. Second aspect is discouraging basically the companies to go for buyback, because buyback is not good for economy, is what the government thinks. Don't think I am telling all this. I am not either telling it is correct also, I am not telling it is absolutely wrong also. That could be the thought process in my understanding of economy as well as taxation. Put together, I am telling that. That's all. So that is a very variety different type of situation. Buyback of shares 46A. So in case of domestic companies, buying back shares after 5/7/2019, who has to pay tax? Company has to pay tax. How much? 20 plus 12 plus 4%. That means 23.296%. Shareholders don't have to pay any tax because that is exempt for them under section 1034A. Whereas prior to 5/7/2019, listed companies don't have to pay any tax, but the same logic applies to unlisted companies prior to 5/7/2019. In case of any other cases, whether it is a non-domestic company or buyback of any other security other than shares by any type of company, then shareholder only will be liable to pay tax, but not the company. That is about buyback, a special transaction once again. Now, 55A, I don't think it's a very relevant thing also, not that required. Simply speaking, if the assessing officer has a problem of ascertaining the fair market value of the capital asset, see a lot of cases are there where we look at fair market value, fair market value. Fair market value, just like that, will there be any tag on every asset that this is the fair market value? Or the assets are all coming with a tag on them? What is their fair market value? No. So somebody has to ascertain it. Who has to ascertain it? Assessing officer can refer this valuation to a valuation officer. There will be somebody else who will perform the valuation of these assets in order to ascertain fair market value. That's it. When can he do that? Of course, he can do that whenever he wants to do. But the law said two things. One, if the SSC has already attached a registered valuer's report and according to the assessing officer is his opinion, not fact, opinion only. If assessing officer thinks that SSC said this is the fair market value, but no, it is actually less than the fair market value, and SSC will always tell fair market value is less only if it is taxable amount. If it is deductible amount, SSC will tell, oh, fair market value is very high. So, assessing officer is of the opinion that whatever is claimed by SSC is not correct, let us say, then he can refer that valuation to a valuation officer. In any other cases where the SSC did not attach any valuation report, then if assessing officer is of the opinion that fair market value of the asset exceeds the value claimed by the SSC and the SSC, the difference between these two is more than 15% of the value claimed by the SSC or by more than 25,000 rupees. There itself the comedy starts. 25,000 rupees, we are talking capital gains chapter. It is nothing in reality because we are talking land, buildings, gold, big rich man's chapter this is. This is not a poor man's chapter. So all the capital gains that will be taxed are all rich people in general who have a lot of properties and all that. 25,000 is what? If the assessing officer thinks that too, thinks that, there is no proof that assessing officer has. So this is the most useless provision we can say, 55A, opinion. When you say opinion, gone, there ends the matter. Assessing officer has the opinion, he will tell. Opinion cannot be proved, right? Is there any proof for opinion in the world? I don't know. There is no proof for opinion. Assessing officer can think that. Suddenly, no, I have to refer to valuation officer. So simply speaking, 55A, I don't know why these lawmakers unnecessarily make all this nonsense. But by assessing officer, if you think that you need a valuation, go for a valuation, they would have said. Otherwise, what is the use? If they kept it like, let us say, instead of 25,000, 50,000 also, there is no difference. Assessing officer will tell, in my opinion, the difference could be more than 50,000. Even if they kept 20 lakhs also, assessing officer he can be of the opinion that, okay, maybe the difference is more than 20 lakhs. He is of the opinion, right? When it is opinion, all these numbers are nonsensical. That doesn't make any sense. Still, like one of the many nonsensical provisions, this is also there. So we just have to address that. No application of that can be there much. Now, the next one is a possible question once again. This was also given in the exams earlier. Capital gain in case of transfer of shares or debentures by non-residents. So this is one case particularly for non-residents, not for normal residents. Only for non-residents this is applicable. This is not a section by itself. It is called a proviso 1 to section 48. Proviso means, as we know, exception. 48 we know. 48 is what? Computation of capital gains. For that there is a proviso 1. That is what? Computation of capital gain in case of transfer of shares or debentures by non-resident. So what happens in that case? In case of non-resident SSC, any capital gain arising from the transfer of shares or debentures of an Indian company, naturally, bought in foreign currency. So that is the point. So non-resident purchased in India some companies' shares or debentures but in foreign currency. Of course, when an NRI, non-resident Indian or a non-resident, purchases asset in India, he sends money from outside India to India, that is foreign currency only. No? He will not have rupees in other country. So he sends his own currency, whichever country he is there, that currency money he will send, and that will be naturally converted into rupees in India. Then the transaction of purchase or sale of debentures happens. So the point is, non-resident purchased the shares or debentures and then he has sold them. Then what happens? Then the capital gains have to be calculated in the following manner and no indexation is allowed. Very important. Even for shares also there is no indexation. No indexation for shares also, debentures so anyway no indexation. So how to calculate in that case is a very important provision, which is Proviso 1 to section 48. First point, cost of acquisition, expenses of transfer, full value of consideration shall be converted into the same foreign currency with the average rate of TT buying and TT selling. TT means telegraphic transfer. You don't need to worry about it. That is buying rate of foreign currency and selling rate of foreign currency. Average of them we have to take for what? Cost of acquisition also, expenses of transfer also, full value of consideration also. That means whenever there is a rupee related data, we have to convert that into foreign currency first, because ultimately the original purchase and sale will happen in rupees only. What we have to do? We have to convert that into foreign currency using which exchange rates? Average rates. Then capital gain will be computed, but how it will be expressed now after our computation? That will be expressed in foreign currency, but that is not what we want. So now what we have to do? That capital gain so computed in foreign currency shall be converted into Indian rupees. So from rupees to foreign currency conversion, first level, again foreign currency to rupee conversion, next level. 2 points of transactions we have to do, or translations we have to do. First conversion is all the transactions, all the things, full value of consideration, expenses of transfer, cost of acquisition, everything. From rupees we have to convert into same foreign currency with which those shares were purchased. Rate there what we have to take is average rate. Then after computing the capital gains in such foreign currency, it has to be reconverted into Indian rupees. Now most important point here is it has to be used TT buying rate only, not average rate. Buying rate on which date? On the date of transfer. So that is the important point. Average rate is easy to remember, but main point is after computing the capital gain in foreign currency, we have to reconvert it using the TT buying rate on the date of transfer of that capital asset. No indexation anyway. No indexation at all. Why no indexation? Logic is there because foreign currencies are also already inclusive of time value of money. Foreign currency, inflation, interest rates, all of them have very close relationship. What is that? We will understand in economics for finance in group 2. But definitely that will be already including the time value of money component. That is why no indexation. But anyway, when law says no indexation, no indexation. To that extent we can take. But law will not also tell just like that. There would be logic behind it. This is the logic behind it. Since foreign currency already considers time value of money itself. Let us look at exercise number 26. X is a non-resident Indian acquired 10,000 shares in an Indian company for 5,99,000 rupees by utilizing US dollars on 10/10/2018. That was in the previous year 18/19. And during our previous year 19/20, he sold such shares for 9,90,000 rupees. Compute capital gains. That's all. So simple question. This can be even an MCQ type of question also nowadays. First thing first, full value of consideration. But you have to take what? Not only rupees. You have to take Indian rupees also. You have to take dollars also. Right? Full value of consideration how much? 9,90,000 Indian rupees as given in the question. That should be converted into dollars using which rate? Full value of consideration happens on the date of transfer, that is 10/9/2019. Average rate on that date we have to take 61 plus 64 by 2. 62.5 is the average. So 9,90,000 divided by 62.5 means how many dollars? $15,840. That is full value of consideration. The expenses and all are not there. If they were there, that also has to be converted into dollars. But original cost of acquisition is there, no indexation anyway. 5,49,000 rupees. So rupees has to be converted into dollars using which rate? That will not be 10/9/2019 rate. That will be 10/10/2018 rate, because that is the date on which the shares were acquired. So 5,49,000 divided by average of 63 plus 66. So average of 63 plus 66 how much? 64.5. So 549,000 divided by 64.5 will be 5,49,000 divided by 64.5. Approximately, let us take $8,512. Rupees we don't even need actually. That doesn't make any sense. This will not give us anything. So we need to calculate capital gains in dollars only. So how much is that? 15,840 minus 8512. That will be $7,328. But that has to be reconverted using the buying rate on the date of transfer. What is the buying rate on the date of transfer? 61. That is the buying rate on the date of transfer. So multiply that with 61. 7328 into 61. 4,47,008 is the capital gain. Of course, is it short term or long term? Depends upon the period of holding, not because whether indexation is there or not. When he purchased it 10/10/2018, when he sold it 10/9/2019, that means it is a short term capital gain. Why? He did not hold it for more than 12 months. Shares. So, assuming they are listed and all, definitely it is short term. Less than 12 months is always short term, listed, unlisted, whatever it may be. So 447,008 is the answer for question number 26. Now, that is the proviso 1 to section 48. Non-residents purchasing shares or debentures in Indian companies and no indexation. First we have to convert the rupees into dollars or any other foreign currency using average rate. After computing the capital gains in foreign currency, that capital gains has to be reconverted into rupees using TT buying rate on the date of transfer. That is the essence of proviso 1 to section 48. These are the various provisions related to capital gains. Almost we can say we have come to the conclusion of this chapter. But before going ahead with some more points related to taxability and all, let us quickly go through already the things which are discussed, and some of the new things also might be there. Cost of acquisition in certain cases. If at all goodwill of the business is there, trademarks or brand name, etc., self-generated goodwill, cost of acquisition will be always nil. That is a point we should remember. Any kind of intangible asset, if it is self-generated, cost of acquisition is nil. If it is acquired, naturally the purchase price, that we know. But main point here is, only new thing is, cost of acquisition for a self-generated goodwill, trademark, brand name, anything like that is nil. Self-generated, there is no cost of acquisition for such kind of intangible assets if they are sold. Then other things we know already, where the capital asset became the property of the SC by way of distribution of assets on total or partial partition of HUF, or under a gift, or by will or succession, inheritance, distribution of assets on liquidation of a company, then cost to the previous owner shall be the cost of acquisition. Cost to the previous owner in that case. Bonus shares also we know already, we discussed it. If bonus shares are allotted before 1/4/2001, we have to take fair market value on 1/4/2001. After 1/4/2001, if the bonus shares are allotted, nil is the cost of acquisition. What about rights shares? Original rights shares, whatever are purchased by the SSC, whatever the amount actually paid by the SSC will be taken as cost of acquisition. Rights entitlement, not rights shares. For that the cost of acquisition is nil. And rights shares which are acquired by the SSC, same thing. Amount actually paid for acquiring the rights shares. Original shares and rights shares. Whatever amount actually paid will be the cost of acquisition. But this is important point. This can be asked for a MCQ very crucially, as we discussed earlier also. What about the person who purchased the right and then using that right he purchased the shares also which are issued by the company? That means the right shares which are purchased by a person in whose favor the SSC has renounced the rights entitlement. Then for that person, what will be the cost of acquisition? Of course, whatever the purchase price paid to the renouncer of rights entitlement plus the amount paid to the company which has allotted the rights shares, that will be the cost of acquisition for that person. We have taken an example also earlier. That is rights shares, bonus shares, and cost of acquisition for previous owner. Only new thing here is self-generated goodwill cost of acquisition will be taken as nil. That's all. That is about the summary of various aspects related to cost of acquisition. Now let us move on to some more practical questions in the form of exercises. Move to exercise number 27. Usha purchases 1000 equity shares in X Limited at a cost of 30 rupees per share, brokerage of 1% in January 96. She gets 100 bonus shares in August 99. Read that carefully. That is before 1/4/2001. She again gets 1100 bonus shares by virtue of her holding in February 2007. Fair market value of the shares of X Limited on 1/4/2001 is 80 rupees. And in January 2020, naturally during our previous year, she transfers all her shares at the rate of 200 rupees per share. Brokerage 2%. Brokerage 2% on sale is an expenses in connection with transfer. Brokerage on purchase should be added to the cost of acquisition. But of course, that should be compared with the fair market value on 1/4/2001, whichever is higher has to be taken according to the numbers available. Compute capital gains taxable in the hands of Usha for the assessment year 2021. But as I said earlier, in any shares related question, I suggest a presentation in columnar form. Let us consider them as original shares. Let us say bonus 1 and bonus 2. Numbers first you write. 1000 shares originally purchased, and bonus shares, bonus 1 was 100, bonus 2 was 1100. Number of shares, right? Now, full value of consideration, that is same, that is 200 rupees per share because she sold all the shares. 200 into 1000, 2 lakhs. 200 into 100, 20,000. 200 into 1100, naturally 2 lakhs 20,000. That is full value of consideration. Now, indexed cost of acquisition or cost of acquisition, whatever the case may be. Original shares, let us look at them first. How many shares purchased? 1000 at a cost of 30 rupees. So 30,000 plus brokerage 1%. Original cost of acquisition was 30,300. But since those are acquired before 1/4/2001, we have to look at fair market value of those shares on 1/4/2001, which was 80 rupees, which is much higher than even 30 plus 1%. That is why let us take fair market value on 1/4/2001 as cost of acquisition. So 1000 into 80 means 80,000 will be the fair market value of those shares on 1/4/2001. 80,000 into 289 divided by 100, naturally. So how much is that amount? 2,31,200. Right? 2,31,200. That is the amount of indexed cost of acquisition for original shares. For bonus 1, also we should take fair market value on 1/4/2001 because bonus 1 was issued prior to 1/4/2001. That is important point. If bonus shares are issued before 1/4/2001, fair market value on 1/4/2001 should be taken as cost of acquisition or indexed cost of acquisition. So fair market value is 80 rupees per share. Naturally, if you apply the same logic, it should be 23,120. You can show the calculation also, what is there in that. Same, no? 100 into 80, 8,000 into 289 by 100. So, 23,120. Bonus 2 will be nil cost of acquisition because those bonus shares are acquired after 1/4/2001 because those are received in February 2007. So, nil will be the cost of acquisition for bonus 2. So, 2,20,000 is definitely long-term capital gain. This is long-term capital loss. This is also long-term capital loss. All are long-term because assets are held for more than 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. All of them have already exceeded. So, 31,200, 3,120, these are long-term capital losses. 2,20,000 long-term capital gain. You can stop there. But because anyway all are long-term, they can be set off also. 2,20,000 minus 31,200 minus 3,120, that will be 185 680 long-term capital gain ultimately will be taxable in the hands of Miss Usha. That is the final answer. 185 680. That is the answer for question number 27. Now let's move on to question number 28. M held 2000 shares in a company ABC Limited. This company amalgamated with another company during the previous year ending 31st March 2020. Under the scheme of amalgamation, M was allotted 1000 shares in the new company. Okay. The market value of the shares allotted is higher by 50,000 rupees than the value of holding in ABC Limited. Assessing officer proposes to treat the transaction as an exchange and to tax this 50,000 as capital gain. Is he justified? It's a theory question. So this is not a problem. 28th question is a theory question. So what should be the answer here? Is it justified? No, there is no provision like that. When there is amalgamation happening, one person will give up his shares and he gets the shares in amalgamated company. At that time nothing is taxable because the transaction is not even regarded as transfer. When that transaction is not even regarded as transfer under section 47, where from the taxability arises, where from calculating difference between its original value and market value arises, all those things are not justified since this transaction is not a transfer at all at that level. When the shares in amalgamated company are sold later, then it might be taxable, but that is not what happened here. Only just amalgamation happened, shares in amalgamated company have been issued in lieu of the shares in amalgamating company. That does not make M liable to pay any tax. That is not even a transfer, hence assessing officer is not justified in his contention. That is the answer you should write. Then exercise number 29. Examine with reasons whether the following statements are true or false. Once again, theory type question. Read them carefully. Alienation of a residential house in a transaction of reverse mortgage under a scheme made and notified by the central government is treated as transfer for the purpose of capital gains. Is it? Absolutely not. It is not regarded as transfer. Very clearly, one of the points in section 47 was reverse mortgage, not treated as transfer. Hence, this statement is false. Then, zero coupon bonds of eligible corporation held for more than 12 months will be long-term capital assets. Yes, because for zero coupon bonds, threshold period is 12 months. More than 12 months, they become long-term capital assets. That statement is true. Third, where an urban agricultural land owned by an individual continuously used by him for agricultural purposes for a period of 2 years prior to the date of transfer is compulsorily acquired and compensation is fixed by state government, resultant capital gain is exempt. Answer is false. Why? Conditions apply for section 1037. Compensation should be fixed by central government or RBI, not by state government. So this is false. Exemption is there. All other things are clear. But compensation fixed by state government will not make it exempt. That will not be exempt. Only if the compensation is fixed and approved by either central government or RBI, then only it will be exempt. So this statement is false. Next, fourth statement is zero coupon bond means a bond on which no payments are received or receivable before maturity or redemption. Naturally, yes, correct. That is true. So answer is false, true, false, true. That's it. That was question number 29. It was a past examination question. Then look at exercise number 30. Arjun was holding 3000 shares in White Limited purchased by him on 8/8/2016 at 60 rupees per share. He gifted these shares to his girlfriend Chitra on 10th February 2019. That is not our previous year. That is 2018-19. So he gifted already in the year of 2018-19. Then Arjun married Chitra on 1st March 2019. That means before marriage he has gifted these shares to Chitra. Chitra was allotted bonus shares by the company at the rate of 1 share for every 3 shares held on 10th September 2019. That is during our previous year. Then Chitra sold all these shares, including bonus shares, on 31st March 2020. That is also our previous year at the rate of 150 per share. State in whose hands capital gains on sale of shares is taxable also compute capital gains. Of course, capital gains are taxable in the hands of Chitra because at the time of transfer, marriage did not exist. So this is also actually a clubbing type of question. Clubbing provisions also will not apply because the transfer happened before the marriage. If at all even clubbing provisions should apply, that should happen between husband and wife. But Arjun and Chitra were not husband and wife on the date of transfer, so that will not be attracted by any of the clubbing provisions. So whoever is the SSE, naturally that will be the person in whose hands the capital gains will be taxable. Chitra is the person who is holding the shares, who sold the shares. So in whose hands the capital gains are taxable? In the hands of Chitra. That is first part of the question of question number 30. So SSC here is Chitra. Arjun is not even a character here. Just like that, he has gifted these shares. That's it. Now here also, because there are two types of shares, let us take original shares and bonus shares. Then original shares are how many? 3000 shares. One share for every 3 shares held means bonus shares will be 1000 shares. What is the full value of consideration? First take that. 150 rupees per share. All shares are sold. Don't think all questions will have the same. If they are all shares sold, we'll calculate like that. If only few of them sold, we'll take only for them. So 150 means into 3000, 4,50,000. 150 into 1000 is 1,50,000. Bonus shares, that is full value of consideration. Then deduct cost of acquisition or indexed cost of acquisition. Let us see that. First of all, these are the shares in White Limited, and we can definitely very well assume that it is a listed share because it is a limited company. In general, it can be a limited company. It can be a listed company. Not necessarily that every limited company is a listed company. That's absolutely an assumption that we can take. But look at the dates here. While computing the period of holding of the present owner, we have to also consider the period of holding of previous owner. When the previous owner purchased 8/8/2016, when the shares are sold 31st March 2020, lot of time is there. Whether listed also, non-listed also, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19, 36 months passed. Definitely long term, irrespective of listed, non-listed. We don't need to even assume that. So what is this original cost of acquisition? 3000 into 60, that will be 1,80,000. Again, cost of acquisition in case of a gift is whatever the cost of acquisition applicable to the previous owner, right? Into year of transfer is 289. Now we have to apply Manjula Shah case, because this is a gift. Though the shares were received by Chitra in 2018-19, we should not take the indexation of 18-19, which was first held by her. Which was first held by the previous owner, we have to take that indexation, which means 2016-17 indexation we have to take. 16-17 indexation is what? 264. 264. That is the 16-17 index number. 264. So 289 by 264 means 1,97,045 is the cost of acquisition of original shares for Chitra. She did not buy them, she just got them free, but still, whatever the previous owner's cost of acquisition is there, that will be taken. Even previous owner's year of acquisition also will be taken, applying Manjula Shah case. Now what about bonus shares? Bonus shares, just like that, she got free of cost from the company. So naturally, cost of bonus shares will be nil. So 1,50,000 is taxable here, and 4,50,000 minus 197,045, 2,52,955 is taxable. This is long-term capital gain for sure. Bonus shares, is it long-term, short-term? That also you have to look at. When was bonus issued? 10th September 2019. Those are sold in 31st March. Are they held for more than 12 months? No. So this is a short-term capital gain. That is the reason why we have to always keep them separately. Don't mix them. Any kind of shares question, whatever the class of shares may be, just keep the calculation separate. Some of them can be long-term, some of them can be short-term, some of them can be listed. All these things are possible, different combinations. So each of them shown separately will give us better picture. So long term capital gain 250 to 955, completely different type of taxability. 1,50,000 short term capital gain, completely different type of taxability. We cannot mix them. That is the nature of this chapter. Short term, long term are different. They have to be shown differently. They have to be calculated differently only. That is question number 30. Now moving on to question number 31. Mr. R holds 1000 shares in Star Minus Limited, not Star Plus, it is Star Minus it seems. An unlisted company, acquired in the year 2001 at a cost of 75,000. He has been offered rights shares by the company in the month of August 2019 during our previous year at 160 rupees per share in the ratio of 2 for every 5 shares held. So how many shares would have been offered? 1000 into 2 by 5. That means 400 rights shares would have been offered to him. But he retains 50% of the rights and renounces the balance rights in favor of Mr. Q for 30 rupees per share in September 2019. All the shares were sold by Mr. R for 300 per share in January 2020. And then there is another character, Mr. Q also. Q sells his shares in December at 280 rupees per share. What are the capital gains taxable in the hands of Mr. R and Mr. Q? Good question, because it has two parties involved here. First, Mr. R, let us take. What about R scenario? R has actually three things. One is original shares, then he has rights shares, then he has rights entitlement also, which was sold. So what are the original shares are there? How many of them? 1000 original shares are there. Number of shares 1000. Right shares would be purchased by him only half. 2 for every 5 means he would have got 400 shares. That means in that 200 only he would have purchased. Rights entitlement will be 200. That will be sold. Now take full value of consideration. Shares are sold at 300 per share. So 300 into 1000 means 3 lakhs. 300 into 200 means 60,000. Rights entitlement was sold for 30 rupees. So 30 rupees into 200 means 6,000. That is full value of consideration. Right? Then deduct indexed cost of acquisition or cost of acquisition, as the case may be. Indexed cost of acquisition for the original shares. How much he purchased them for? 75,000 rupees into 289 by 100 naturally. Why? Because he purchased in the year 2001 itself. 2001 index number is 100 only. So 75,000 into 289 by 100 means 216,750. 2 lakhs 16,750 will be the indexed cost of acquisition for original shares. What about rights shares? Is it indexed cost or normal cost? It should be normal cost only. Why? Because rights shares were issued when in the month of August 2019. So that is a short-term capital gain, short-term capital asset basically. So no indexation at all. That's why. What was the rights issues price? 160 per share. So 200 into 160 means 32,000 rupees is the normal cost of acquisition for rights shares. And as we know, for rights entitlement, the cost of acquisition should be taken as nil. So 28,000 here, 6,000 here. This is also short-term capital gain. This is also short-term capital gain. This will be long-term capital gain. How much is that? 3 lakhs minus 216,750. That is 83,250 long-term capital gain. That's all. If you want to just combine those two, you can say long-term capital gain 83,250, short-term capital gain 34,000. That is the answer for this guy R. What about Mr. Q? Q is the guy who received the shares from R. He purchased the right first, then he purchased the right shares also. So how many shares he would have purchased? 200, because that is the one which R has sold to Mr. Q. So 200 number of shares first of all, multiplied with R sold 300. Is that what we have taken? Full value of consideration, correct. Q sold 280. Yeah, Q sold 280 per share. That will be 56,000. That means full value of consideration for Q will be 56,000. Anyway, it is a short-term capital asset, so there is no indexation and all. Just you have to take cost of acquisition. But mainly, while taking cost of acquisition, what you have to take here? 160 plus 30. 30 he paid for getting the right. Using that right, he purchased the shares of Star Minus Limited at 160 rupees. So total price he paid would be 190 rupees. So 190 into 200, 38,000 rupees will be the cost of acquisition. In other words, 18,000 rupees will be short-term capital gain for Mr. Q. So for R, there is a long-term capital gain also, short-term capital gain also, whereas for Q, there is only a short-term capital gain of 18,000 rupees. That is the case of Q. 280 into 200 minus 200 into 190, not 160, 190. 160 share price, 30 rupees what he paid to R for rights entitlement. That will be part of his cost of acquisition. So 38,000 deducted from 56,000 results in 18,000 rupees short-term capital gain. So these are some of the key crucial questions related to particularly the shares type of questions. Past examination questions also are there in that. Practice these questions very well. With that, we can conclude provisions related to taxability of capital gains of different types of transactions. We observed various things coming to computation of period of holding, by which we have to determine whether an asset is a short-term capital asset or a long-term capital asset. Computation of cost of acquisition in certain scenarios, and transactions which are not regarded as transfer in certain scenarios, and transactions where full value of consideration has to be taken something in a different manner, and transactions where transfer happens in 1 year but taxability arises in some other year, liquidation of companies. Like this, different types of transactions are possible. Slump sale type of transaction, depreciable asset is a separate thing. All of them are very important provisions. The core provisions related to the capital gains chapter are done. In the next chapter or next class, we will discuss about taxation part of capital gains. So far we looked at taxability part of capital gains. Now we will look at tax rates applicable to capital gains. And as we know, long-term capital gains, short-term capital gains are having different tax rates. So that part we will discuss. And next we have to also discuss about the exemptions which are there from the capital gains. How the exemptions can be claimed from the capital gains is another topic. With those two topics we can conclude this chapter of capital gains. But the main provisions of taxability have been completed with today's session. In the next session, we will discuss about the tax rates applicable to capital gains as well as exemptions which might be claimed, which can be claimed from capital gains. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.